This is kind of easier than doing NHL. And picking favorite teams in football, it turned out to be relatively easy. This was a much easier thing for me to do in terms of, okay, I would cheer for this team against this team. I don't know if it's the shorter season, if it's the whole fact that for football, you kind of have to have teams that you cheer for, and the idea of cheering for multiple teams is more frowned upon. But I didn't really have that much trouble picking favorite teams here. I really didn't. Now, so this is 1 through 32, and again, this is if teams are up against each other. Who am I cheering for? At 32, Dallas. I do apologize to Cowboys fans everywhere, but that's just the way it's been. Since I was a kid, I have not cheered for Dallas for the most part. When it was Dallas against San Francisco, I was always cheering for the Niners. And yeah, that goes back a very long way. That Dallas would be at the bottom of the list at 31. Washington ends up at 31. Now with Washington, I'm going to admit I did cheer for them. I'll say maybe 30 years ago, and it's just they've been mired mediocrity for so long. I don't find myself rooting for them much at all. And with that same idea in place, at 30 are the New York Jets. Again, just mired mediocrity. I remember a couple years ago when they were supposed to get better, and I made a statement along the lines of, "But they're the Jets, so they're not going to." People are like, "No, they're gonna. They could win their division, and they look much better this year." And then suddenly they didn't. So I will say this as well. I don't actively cheer against football teams. Cowboys, maybe a little bit sometimes, but even then, there are things with the Cowboys that I like, and I don't find myself necessarily rooting against. This is more of who I'm rooting for than against. At 29, Cardinals. I was a big Kurt Warner fan, so when Warner was with the Cardinals, definitely cheered for him there. But in terms of the Cardinals in general, even going back to when they were in St. Louis, I was not a huge Cardinals fan. Yeah. See, now I get off on a tangent. So, yeah, he went to the Super Bowl. They lost to the Steelers 27-23. That was a pretty good Super Bowl. I do need to do Super Bowl videos as well on individual Super Bowls that were absolutely entertaining and fun. And yeah, so the Cardinals end up at 29th. So through my fandom of Kurt Warner and whatnot. Number 28. This is an odd one. This is one that I'm like, well, I don't cheer for the Raiders. I never really have. But now that they're in Las Vegas, and I do have a lot of friends now in the city of Las Vegas, I don't know if when we see football return, if I'm gonna find myself rooting more for the Raiders than I did when they were in Oakland and LA. And again, some of these teams it's been an absolute disaster when it comes to trying to create an expanded period of success. And so yeah, the Raiders end up in 28th, 27th. And nobody's going to be too surprised to see that I have Baltimore at 27th. Bengals fan, there are certain teams that I got frustrated with, and yet you might have expected the Steelers to be down here, and they're not. I can't come up with a really good reason why the Steelers aren't one of my more disliked, but the Ravens are down here, and yet I respect the Ravens. I respect their defense. I respect their history, and they've been a force in the NFL for a very long time. And again, it's that defensive side of the ball. They've just been able to have some real beastly seasons overall. Number 26, a team that's had its ups and its downs in recent seasons, and that's the Falcons. And so the Falcons, I have them at 26, and again, it's a matter of they're not one of my favorites. They're not a team that I find myself rooting for if I'm watching a football game. Will I root for them against the Cardinals? Yeah. And at this point on the board, it's noticeable. If a team has a bird for a logo, I may not be a fan. I don't know what that is. I really don't know what that is. I don't know what I have against birds. I was unaware I had anything against birds. But then you look at the NHL and Penguins, story checks out. So maybe there's something for me that's against birds. Maybe it's because I'm a cat person, so I naturally have a non-cheering I hope a feeling towards birds. 25, finishing out the bottom row, the New England Patriots. Now, the New England Patriots in the 80s would have been much higher on this list, But, they've had a lot of success, so it's hard for me to go, yeah, I'm really cheering for them. They've won their share of championships. Now that Tom Brady's moved along, the Patriots, in my eyes, can just move along a little bit and let somebody else have the spotlight for a while. That would be nice of them to allow that to happen. I don't know. I don't know that I would bet against Belichick and the Patriots, though. I don't know that I would. Even though Brady's moved on, who knows? Maybe they figure out a way to stay there. Number 24. And these guys would have moved up from where they've been previously. The Chiefs, who now are very successful, Kansas City. The Chiefs have been one of those teams that have been an up and down team for me. There have been years where I could have had them as low as 31 or 30. And again, this is the first time I've ever done this video, so they absolutely could have been this low. There's other seasons they would have been higher up. Again, it depends. A lot of it will depend on quarterback. A lot of it will depend on just the overall feel of the team and whatnot. Kansas City, though, congratulations to them on an excellent season. Number 23, and I've tried. I have tried, to quote Pulp Fiction, trying real hard, Ringo. I've tried really hard to cheer for Cleveland on some level, and to say, all right, this is it. All right, I'm come on Browns, and then they just blow it. They find a way to blow it, and I either find myself just shaking my head and going, yeah, I should have seen that coming, or depending on the circumstance, you might actually get a chuckle out of it where you go, man, that was a disaster. This is and when fans in Cleveland say they're pretty sure that God hates the Browns, I get their point. I think that it's there might be something to that. At number 22, Birds, Eagles. Yeah, again, I don't know what to say. Philadelphia Eagles end up down here when I eventually do something on the world of baseball. We'll see where the Phillies end up, but the Eagles, yeah, for me are 22nd. Apparently, I'm not a big NFC East fan, just in general. But if the Eagles are against the Cowboys, I'm cheering for the Eagles. 21, and they've been kind of all over the place in my time watching them, and that's the Broncos. See, the Bengals have been all over the place on the field, but as a fan, I've cheered for the Bengals for a long time, which is, well, it's usually painful. Cheering for the Bengals is usually a painful experience. So yeah, the Broncos end up at 21. In the heyday of John Elway, I found myself cheering for John Elway, not as much the Broncos. We all know, Homer Simpson ends up owning the Broncos, and it's this joke that, the Denver Broncos, because he wanted to own the Cowboys. It was a funny joke then. Eventually, Denver breaks through, so if you're young and you look at that now, you might think, I don't know, the Broncos seem like a good team. I agree with Marge. What's the problem? Yeah, when that episode came out, there was a problem. Number 20. And this is a team that I have absolutely disliked. There have been teams that I've disliked, and the Giants, there have been times where I really didn't like the Giants. And again, it depended on who they were playing against, on quarterbacks, on coaches, and all of that wonderful stuff. So for me, not too far below the middle of the pack right now, the New York Giants. Again, this isn't about who I have a problem with or don't have a problem with. It's more of so if this game's on, who am I cheering for? Giants would be ahead of 12 other teams. At 19, ahead of 13 other teams, the Bears. The Bears, there have been times where I wasn't a fan of them either. I will say, though, Mike Ditka was fantastic. I remember when their quarterback was McMahon. I thought he was overrated, to be honest. I didn't think he was I thought that the Bears won a lot during that era, not because McMahon was a great quarterback, but because they had such a good defense and they were so well put together as a team that the quarterback wasn't as important to them as it was to other teams. So for me, the Bears end up at 19th. At 18th, and these guys have taken a hit, there was a time where if you're the Dolphins, I'm probably cheering for you. Going back to Dan Marino, the first Super Bowl that I watched had Marino in it, and they didn't win, but I thought, well, they're going to win it soon, though. That Dan Marino, all those touchdown passes, he's going to get it soon enough. Still waiting. So, yeah, Miami's taken a bit of a hit in recent years. I do like what they did at the draft this year, so once we get into the following season, whether it's soon or never, whatever happens with sports, right? I could find myself cheering for them again. And until next season starts, this is how I feel about them right now. And coming out of next season, who knows? Because again, it depends on a lot of different factors. Number 17, proving I may not be a huge fan of horses either. Yeah, the birds thing is weird. So is the horse thing. That the Colts end up down here with the Broncos. I don't know. You'll notice no cats. No cats in the bottom 16. It was weird to see all those logos in a row. And I went over them a couple of times. I'm like, nah, that's legit. That's how I really feel. Those are my favorite teams. Weird. So at number 16, the first cat shows up. And it's the Jacksonville Jaguars. I do like Jacksonville. I do cheer for Jacksonville at times. The interesting thing is, I get them mixed up with the Titans at times. Those are the two teams that, for whatever reason in football, I sometimes get the two mixed up with one another. No idea why. And I'm just talking about like how the record is and everything. I might get one mixed up with the other, and yeah, I don't know what it is. But Jacksonville, if they're against each other, Jacksonville's not the team I'm cheering for. But I might get mixed up during the game and forget and start accidentally cheering for Jacksonville. So right, number 15. You know what? It is nice to see the Niners relevant again. It is nice to see the Niners playing well again. I think the greatest quarterback in history is probably Tom Brady, but you can make the argument for Joe Montana. You can, and I can't really argue it vehemently. I can't. I could also make a Steve Young argument since, he's a left-handed person, and I'm a left-handed person, so if you're a left-handed QB, I'm right there with you, and Tua's a left-handed QB for Miami, so I might be really hoping he does something special for them. But San Francisco, I enjoyed watching them this year. I did find myself kind of sort of cheering for them. And, good on them for being relevant again. Number 14, Tennessee. Again, if Tennessee and Jacksonville are against each other, I'm going to be cheering for Tennessee. There were points this year where I had people accusing me of being anti-Tennessee because of where they were in the power rankings. That's not a thing. I like Tennessee. They're ahead of a lot of other teams on this board. I'd love to see them win a Super Bowl at some point in time. And speaking of, I'd like to see them win a Super Bowl at some point in time. That's where the Minnesota Vikings enter the chat. The Vikings, of all the organizations in football that need one, I would say that they'd be at the top of that list. And yet, while they're probably at the top of the list, number 12 is Buffalo. I got accused a lot this year in the power rankings of not cheering for Buffalo. Not cheering for or not believing in Buffalo, those are two different things. And I was not really a huge believer that Buffalo was necessarily going to go further than they did in the playoffs. And yet I was sad that they didn't. I felt that it was unfortunate that they didn't go further in the playoffs. And I thought that, it would be nice to see Buffalo do something. There's been too many seasons where they have a good start and then it kind of falls apart for them. And their fans get their hopes up and then just have them crushed again. So for Bills fans, honestly, there have been times as a kid where I would have the Buffalo Bills right down at the bottom, but I'd like to see them win something. I'd like to see something positive happen for the Buffalo Bills. I don't know, maybe this year. Maybe this year they take that leap and they end up winning a playoff game. That'd be nice. All right, so moving along from teams that haven't won a Super Bowl to a team that maybe should have won another one, but they made an interesting call on the 1-yard line, and that's the Seahawks. I know. Isn't that awful that that's the first thing we think about with the Seahawks? It's the first thing I think about. And yet the Seahawks for me are at 11th. Now, at the time that they blew that call, I may have had a good laugh over it, but I would like to see the Seahawks, win a championship here before Wilson's, fallen off the rails as a top quarterback in the NHL. And I think the Seahawks are run pretty darn well. It would be nice to see them win. And again, Seattle's not too far from me. I've had ups and downs with Seattle. I want to say I really got mad at Seattle when Cortez Kennedy was being wasted on teams that were just garbage, other than Tez, where I was like, okay, so Cortez Kennedy and not much else. And they can't score points, but Cortez can't play quarterback, so you're stuck with it. So yeah, the Seahawks just outside the top 10. Number 10, I have the Houston Texans. Now, the Houston Texans, I've been rooting for them because, again, it's nice to see different teams win. I do appreciate that with football. I appreciate the parity with football. There is better parity, it feels like, with the NFL than there is for a lot of other leagues. And you can see teams going through rebuilds, but you can see how it's going to get better quickly. Miami's a good example of how things should get better relatively quickly. Houston, over the last couple of years, I've seen a lot of potential for a championship there. It's a matter of realizing it, but I think the potential's there. At 9, a team that I honestly found myself kind of surprised to be cheering for a little bit this year, and that was Detroit. The Detroit Lions, they had some good starts there. They eventually fell out of the chase for a playoff spot, but they stayed in the race a lot longer than you might have expected, and they lost some games they probably shouldn't have. There were some heartbreakers along the way, and I liked their moxie. I liked their fight. I thought they played pretty darn well, and definitely better than their record would show you. So you're looking at a team that could turn things around next season. Detroit's on the list for me. At number 8, they shouldn't be in the top 8. There's no way the Pittsburgh Steelers should be in the top 8. And yet, the Steelers always manage to have players that I like. I'm not a Roethlisberger fan, but I'm usually a fan of the guys he's throwing the ball to. I'm usually the fan of the guys on the defensive side of the ball. And I do find myself cheering for the Steelers against most other teams. Even though, yeah, I like the Bengals, but and yes, the Steelers have had their share of successes at the expense of the Bengals, but really, who hasn't? I mean, if I'm going to dislike teams that have beaten the Bengals, I'm going to have 31 teams to really dislike, because beating the Bengals over their history, it's been relatively easy for a lot of teams to beat the Bengals. I hate saying that as a Bengals fan, who after the last time the Bengals won in the playoffs, I kind of said, you know what, I'm done. I had a really hard, it took me a long time after that last loss to really get over it. Number 7, and that's the Carolina Panthers. I like the Carolina Panthers. I've always liked the Carolina Panthers, right from their expansion year right through until now. And we'll see what they do this summer in order to fix things, but I like them. At 6, another team that I genuinely like, and that's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That goes back to the 80s, where they didn't have a whole lot. Back to the Vinny Testaverde days, where it was kind of an ugly looking thing on the ice, or on the field. A hockey guy coming out. Shut up, hockey guy. Football guy right now. But yeah, Tampa Bay, those orange jerseys they wore in the 80s, eyesore. And then you'd watch them play, and that was a bit of an eyesore as well. So I do like the new look that they're rocking this year. I do like that they've improved their look over the years, and I do like Tampa Bay. I do find myself cheering for Tampa Bay, and that goes back a long way. Now, number 5, Packers. If you know, I'm a fan of small market. I'm a fan of just the whole Green Bay fandom and how that works. And as dorky as the cheesehead thing might look, I'm a fan. If you stuck me at Lambeau and I've got the cheesehead thing going on, I think I'd be pretty happy watching some Lambeau leaps and stuff like that going on. I always found myself cheering for Green Bay against a team like San Francisco when they met in the playoffs. There were some great matchups between those two teams. You know, back when the AFC was mostly and you knew that the NFC Championship game was your real Super Bowl. I remember those days. And Green Bay and San Francisco, big clashes. And Brett Favre, or Brett Favre, as we used to refer to him at my old job, I was a big fan of his as well. Number 4, New Orleans Saints. New Orleans Saints have always been a favorite of mine, back to when they couldn't win a playoff game. I want to say, I'm trying to remember how long ago it was when I was watching, they were talking about how New Orleans couldn't win a playoff game, and there was a year that I think they went 11-5. They still didn't win the playoff game, and it was an ongoing thing. And then Drew Brees goes, I'll get you through some playoff games. You guys will be just fine with me, and it's been great since then. So, yeah, New Orleans, I've been a big fan of throughout. I can't argue against New Orleans. And at 3, and this is one I don't talk a lot about, but I do still cheer for the Rams. I do. Which means that both teams in LA are among my favorites. And the Rams I've cheered for since they were the LA Rams. And then when they went to St. Louis, I still cheered for them. Then they go back to LA, and I'm still cheering for them. And I'd like to see more championships go to them, because I like the Rams. And I remember As a Rams fan in the late 80s, it was heartbreaking because there were years that I was like, the Rams are the second best team in football. It's a shame we have to play the 49ers. So they might have been the second best team in football at times. Now, that's with Jim Everett, who we all remember the interview, the infamous interview where he's called Chris. But, I really felt like, okay, this is the year for the Rams. Oh, never mind. Joe Montana says no. So, yeah, I was a big Rams fan when everybody was cheering for the Niners. Number 2 is the Bengals. And number 1, the Chargers. Anytime these teams meet each other, it's usually a good thing because they're almost never both good at the same time. At least that feels like that's the way it is. So I have an easy time figuring out who I want to see win a game if they're against each other because usually one of them's at least half good. It was a tough year for me this year with football. I was able to check out emotionally on football games really early in the season. I'd like to see the Chargers turn things around, and I'd like to see the Bengals turn things around as well. I hope Joe Burrow is as good as the scouting reports indicate him to be. The problem is, I have watched the Bengals bungle things up. They're called the Bungles for a reason. It's not just because it's close to Bengals. I mean, that's a part of it, of course. But a lot of it is just asset management's been a problem. Everything's kind of been a problem. And there was a lot of blame thrown at Andy Dalton that I didn't think was fair over his last couple of years as quarterback with Cincinnati. I thought he took too much criticism. I thought the team around him wasn't very good either. But we'll see if a restart at quarterback, and the Chargers are undergoing a restart at quarterback as well. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year for me as a football fan. I'm really hoping we get football in the fall, and I get to see where things are going to end up. So there you go. Those are my favorite teams 1 through 32. And for whatever reason, this is way easier with football than trying to do this with hockey. I've been trying with hockey for the last couple of days. And finally, I'm like, I'm going to try this with football. Oh, yeah, this is easy. Oh, that's easy. Because, again, single game situation, who do I cheer for? All right, I'm cheering for these teams. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for all your support, especially during this trying time everywhere. And hey, I will talk to you guys again soon. I may do story time today where I'm reading my book to my wife. We'll see. It's just been very busy for her and I for the last couple of days. Me with the videos for both channels. And then for her, she's been doing a lot of masks and surgical caps for local hospitals, veterinarians, and whatnot. So she's doing a lot of sewing. I'm doing a lot of videoing. And then by the end of the day, we see how much time we have left. Thank you guys so much, though, for all your support throughout this. I will talk to you again soon.